In progress. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz, and I'm doing today's presentation on actually a passage of one of the chapters of the Quran. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because in the past I have actually went and discussed some of these concepts, but I didn't go straight to the chapter. I just sort of discussed it based on certain things that I'm seeing and certain actions. And I think it'd be best to go to the chapter directly. Is also to review the discussion that I had before. I'm going to just share the chapter. It's a short chapter in English. I'm just going to share it in English. It's a chapter from the Quran and the dawn break, al-fajr. So I apologize. I'm going to just hit the share screen. And it's right here. Let me just move this out of the way. It's not a big chapter. It's 30 verses, similar to the chapter on Al-Mulk, about 30 verses. So, okay, if we could just read the chapter together, because I think it highlights the point I was trying to raise, and possibly I should have just went to the chapter instead of raising it before. This video will be titled, or this presentation, God honored me, God humiliated me. And it's meant for those who flip-flop from that mindset to reflect on the meaning of honor in God's eyes and the meaning of humiliation in God's eyes. Now, I did share in the past passage or a video, my apologies, by another teacher. And I thought he kind of got the same understanding from the Quran. So I will end with that at the very end so that you can kind of look at it from a scholarly opinion, as I do not have a PhD in Islamic studies. By the break of dawn, and I mentioned throughout that the Quran seems to engage human beings based on what they are experiencing and what they are witnessing and what they are seeing. And one of the things that we witness is the dawn break, al-fajr. By the nights, twice 5. I'm not going to give a commentary on the entire, so I'm just going to read it and stop at God honored me, God humiliated. By the even and odd, contrasted. And by the night when it passes away, is there not in these an adoration or evidence for those who understand? Seest thou not how thy Lord dealt with the Ad people? They were a very mighty, powerful people in the past. Of the city of Iram, which with lofty pillars, the like of which were not produced in all the land. And with the Thamud people, another set of people, who cut out huge rocks in the valley. And with Pharaoh, Lord of States. All these transgressed beyond bounds in the lands, and heaped therein mischief on mischief. Therefore did thy Lord pour on them a scourge of diverse chastisements. For thy Lord is as a guardian on a watchtower. No, now as for man, when his Lord trieth him, giving him honor and gifts, then says he puffed up, my Lord had honored me. Now, I'm using the translation for these right here from Yusuf Ali, excuse me. It helps sometimes when you're looking at a particular passage to understand it, to look at several translations, like to go from one to the next, say like, when his Lord tries him, then is gracious and provides good things for him. He says, my Lord has been gracious to me. If you look at it, sometimes you can get kind of like a more fuller translation if you look at several translations. And as for man, whenever his Lord tries him and honors him and blesses him, then he says, my Lord has honored me. I also like listening sometimes to Asad. Also, he's a good translator. But as for man, whenever his sustainer tries him by his generosity and by letting him enjoy a life of ease, he says, my sustainer has been generous towards me. There's also the one by Sahih International. I'm just going to make it a short video. And as for man, when his Lord tries him and thus is generous to him and favors him, he says, my Lord has honored me. I'm just going to take one more by Pictol. As for man, whenever his Lord tried him by honoring him and is gracious unto him, he says, my Lord honoreth me. Now we're going to go to the next one and go back to the Yusuf Ali. That's my preferred translation because it addresses the Quran and it translates the Quran with the words as royalty speaking. And that's why I prefer Yusuf Ali. Now, but when he tried him, looking at here, restricting his substance for him, then says he in despair, my Lord has humiliated me. Again, when he tried him, restricting his substance for him, then says he, my Lord has humiliated. So again, both of these are trials. It says here about for a man when his Lord tried him. So that you're going to face trials where God gives you blessings. And you're going to face a trial. This is for all of us because you can't determine someone's faith if they're only receiving good. In fact, if you only receive good and you don't receive this situation, because the test, both of these are tests. You're going to be facing this test and this test. Chances are God opened the doors of all good because he saw nothing good in you. And you should be concerned about that. And the way to respond to that is not to put yourself in these type of trials or tribulation. We all don't want to be in trials and tribulations of hardship, but to turn to God and repent. And then as the verses show later, it will help you understand whether you're tried in here or you're tried in here. The next verses show what is the solution if you fail this test or this test. Forget about this word because that's not the correct answer here. This is not the correct answer here. This is a test. This is a test. So the response, God tells us, nay, nay, but you honor not the orphans. So what he helps him understand is this is a test and this is a test. But if you're seeing this is an honor, and I mentioned several like very popular individuals who are like referencing Muslims as backwards or like Richard Dawkins saying, you know, like, where's your Nobel Peace Prize? Like, you know, you're not producing, you know, God, you know, honored Muslims at one point in history, and they were doing all of these great things. Sort of like all these other individuals are doing great things. And he, out of his wisdom, he also wants to test and put us in a position where we're trying. Now, we say praise to God in this situation. It's like the Prophet Muhammad, upon him peace and blessings, taught us. And we say praise be to God in this situation. But the person who does not recognize the honor of others, this is his mindset. My Lord honored me. My Lord humiliated me. The Muslim or the mu'min or the one who believes in God in this situation, in this test, their answer is, praise be to God. And their answer here is, again, praise be to God. These are tests. This is a test. And this is a test. And the answer is the same with both tests. Praise be to God. We don't like to be in trials. We should ask for protection from trials. And when we're here, we should also see it as a trial, because God says it's a trial. I showed you more than one translation. Of course, you can look at all the other English translation that God is trying you to see. And so the answer is, in terms of what you say, the words is praise be to God. And here, praise be to God. If that comes out of you here, chances are this will come out of you here. And God explains why it comes out of you here and why it comes out of you here. And this is, he removes, if you will, your understanding of what honor means, and he gives his understanding or his knowledge of what honor means. It is to feed the orphan. This is what honor in God's eyes mean. That you don't devour inheritance. That you don't like obsess with wealth, becoming like, super duper rich. We're seeing like, I don't know how people become billionaires, but you're seeing people where a few people control the majority of the wealth of the world. And this is similar to what happened here. Some of these individuals that God expresses, or the chapter begins with, what happened to them over time, because they were just enjoying this situation, and they saw it as, must be that they're just great and advanced and something special about them. And they were taking advantage of the poor and the marginalized and disenfranchised. They were taking advantage of them, and they were trying to get greater and richer and better. And so they felt like if when God is going to, punish them, they're going to, of course, just like Satan, when God expressed anger at his actions, he went from you put me in error, similar to kind of that flip-flop, because the insight, like I said, there's the mirror and the reverse mirror. The insight did not respond correctly in this trial. When you don't respond the correct way in this trial, it's a given you will not respond correctly in this trial. You won't say, praise be to God here, and then you will not say praise be to God here. And thy Lord cometh. So when the earth is pounded to powder, and thy Lord cometh, and his angels rank upon rank. Sometimes people, they want, God and the angels to come by them, they want them to come to be able to like believe in the truth. And hell that day is brought face to face. On that day will man remember, but how will that remembrance profit him? So I don't want to go into too much, but I believe I've discussed this in other areas, but this is not the purpose of this video. Let me hit the next. This is next, yeah. He will say, "All would that I had sent forth good deeds for this my future life." God defines like what are the good deeds. For that day, his chastisement will be such as none else can inflict. And his bonds will be such as none other can bind. And to the righteous soul will be said, O thou soul in complete rest and satisfaction. Remember, the righteous soul is going to be tried here. They're going to say, praise be to God. They're going to be tried here. And they should also say, praise be to God. That's what should come out of you when you're tried. And so that soul is the definition of the one who's content. O thou soul in complete rest and satisfaction, come back thou to thy Lord, well pleased with thyself and well pleasing unto him. Enter thou then among my devotees. Yeah, enter thou my heaven. So I don't want to make it too long, but I mentioned that honor and humiliation, sometimes people have different understanding of it. They understand it as similar to kind of like what Pharaoh and the Ad people, the Thamud people, who built great things, who everybody in the land recognized them. So they see it as that. Now, you shouldn't showcase your good deeds, but here again, you're not trying to win a piety contest with others. You're trying to ask yourself about reflecting on what came out of you in this trial. What came out of you in this trial? That's the test you want to ask yourself first and foremost. No one knows that answer. I mean, we all make proclamations and declarations on social media. So put that aside privately. What came out of you in this trial? What came out of you in this trial? Second test, is, are these your actions? These are things that you want to look into. Are these your actions? Like when you're asked to, because we're always talking about the tyrant. But when we're asked to, for example, where we have power to execute and give people their rights, do we give people their rights? Look in our own little kind of microscopic power land. Do we also give every person their right? And are we like, those great people of the past in people's eyes? Are we running to, don't look at everything single, divorced from the other. Look at it all together. This is what it means to be holistic. It's not extreme. Extreme, kind of like a borderline, like black, white. That's not how what holistic means. All of these have to be together. You have to look at all of these together. If you do some but not others, it just means there's work to do. It doesn't mean you're Pharaoh. It just means there's work to do that you should recognize. Maybe turn to God and ask him what that work that you need to do. But look at it as a whole, because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So look at it as a whole. As a whole, is this your internal reality? Your actions, your interactions, when you're given a little power to judge and to give people their rights, is that your actions? Because if so, then this is the outcome. This is what you're going to face. If God didn't give you power to be in a position of where Pharaoh and the Ad people, or the Thamud people, probably because he loves you and he doesn't want you to oppress others. It's not because, as some individuals mentioned, Muslims are backwards or they can't build or do great things. But power intoxicates and it corrupts. We have seen like with these individuals. And looking at them as though they are honored is a false view of the world. Or looking at them as though like we're backwards and they're forward, like they're building all this. It's also a negative, distorted view of the world. Because those individuals, they're going to be facing very, very strong, diverse chastisements. Maybe when they exit or when they return to God. So I mentioned that because a lot of times people will say like, I don't know why, but they seem to have this kind of view too, where if you're not building all these great things, then you're a failure and God didn't honor you. And it's sad when Muslims do it, because it's like the Quran discusses this mindset and mentality. And the Prophet was very clear on the verse in the Quran, not in the Quran, the Hadith, on in peace and blessings, that when you see something good that you like, you praise God. And when something happens that you don't like, you praise God. And you expected them to respond in kind, not just to give a presentation, but to respond in kind. But their response was, God honored me. God opened doors for me. Which is totally like against the spirit of the Quran. And it doesn't, you're saying holistic, but I think they have this kind of like borderline understanding of holistic. They're seeing things as black, white. Either you're doing this or you're drowning. You're this or you're in despair. That's not holistic. Holistic is to look at all layers that make up a human being, and then to recognize that there are grays and spectrums. There are contradictions even. Like some individuals maybe have said God, praise be to God here. They didn't say God honored me, but they're struggling and learning to say praise be to God here. Because, it just tells them that this is how, you need to first fix the framing of your understanding of the view of the world and continue. And then, the way you should really be judging if God honored you or not. Do you feed the orphans, and do you feed the poor? And when you're given power over any small, do you go ahead and devour inheritance? Are you trying to be the next Pharaoh? When the earth is pounded to powder again, God says, are you waiting, because there's another verse, and I don't want to get into it, but are you waiting for the angels and God to come rank upon rank? And for hell to come face to face? Because a lot of times, people will argue that they need to see the evidence. But I have shown quite a few blogs that you can sometimes present the evidence, and based on bias and prejudice, people will discount it, belittle it, or ignore it. I mean, or they will fight. Like I have recently been posting on Twitter of Palestinians trying to go before the International Criminal Court, and they're facing like a ferocious fight for them not to come and bring evidence of their rights being transgressed upon. How could you be asking for evidence of God when the evidence is right there before you of how you respond and how you act? Are these your actions and your interactions in the land? And how are you going to recognize the truth of a higher world, like from God? Because that will destroy the heart. These actions will seal the heart from allowing the light to come in, the spiritual light. Transgressions and oppression, it destroys the heart. It seals it. So how are you going to be able to see that higher truth? And that's why people have this distorted understanding then of honor and humiliation. I mentioned this, more than once. People did not get it. So I want to just go through the chapter just briefly. And if I can take you to excuse me, here. I believe I did it here. There are two names of God. Try to say, right, sometimes it has a different spelling. Should have had it ready in advance. I apologize. Let me just look. I'm looking for the date. I think I had it in 22. Just here. It's not this one. Oh, here it is. And I mentioned this because some individuals, like when you're trying to explain, like they're literally responding again, like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, who are like making comments to show that the oppression of Muslims, that God humiliated us. We're supposed to say because we're tried, that God humiliated us. And so they throw that at you. It's understandable when, these individuals make such claims because of the fact that they're acting like exactly like the chapter shows in the very beginning. But it's sad, really sad, when scholars, Muslims with PhDs, are making those exact same arguments. And you're just thinking, did you read the Quran? And so they have this distorted understanding of surrender and submission. And they also have a distorted understanding of honor and humiliation. And because of that, it's not just within, like I say, the Muslim community, it's not within the non-Muslim community who are like antagonistic towards Muslims. But also Muslims seem to have a distorted understanding of humiliation. And for that reason, you'll see things like control, shame, and guilting Muslims into giving up their faith or practicing it in a way, in a control, shame, guilt mindset. So I addressed those names kind of briefly. I should have went to the chapter and discussed it, but I went like through Prophet Sunan, calm and peace. And I talked about how he saw power, how, when God put him in power, and because Prophet Suleiman was facing a major trial and he saw it. And he returned to God and he prayed and he made that famous dua of his. I don't have it with me on hand. I don't have it perfectly memorized, but if you check for Prophet Suleiman, when he faced the ants in the valley, he had a power unbelievable. How did he view or respond to that interaction? Remember I said the mirror and the reverse mirror when God places before you. How did he respond? And also the man who came from the city's outskirts to defend the prophets. How did he respond when he was in the city's outskirts? Did he feel like God humiliated? No. And when he came and he was killed, remember, he came to defend the prophets and he was killed in a really bad, and I wrote an article on that. How did he respond when he was killed? Like he was asked to exit? No. He responded with, God honored me. Because now he's seeing that he's being rewarded for standing up for the truth. He came from the city's outskirts to defend the prophets. And he's not judging how people saw it in their eyes. He's judging how this set of actions that he engaged in now, not even judging at all. He's just now seeing reality as reality because he exited the world and he realized now that he won. And that God, so he responds with God honored. Not in this world when he's, becoming greater and greater, but in the next world, when he's seeing how these actions of him defending the prophets or being in the outskirts of the city, people said, in careful study of this man, people said that this individual before the prophets came used to feed the poor. And usually if you're somebody like who's, remember I don't think I should say it because I didn't mention except on Twitter, but I did a video on the 7 under the shade of the Quran. And I mentioned how in stages on Twitter, how this is interpreted. If privately, before you are elevated, if privately you are engaged in the actions that I mentioned in the chapter of Al-Fajr, if you are engaged in these actions, the 7 on the shade of the Quran is the person who, like, they're true and sincere to their faith and values. Like if you're a Muslim, then you're praising God privately, you're sincere and true to that relationship. I mentioned that of Maryam, upon her peace, the mother of Jesus, upon her peace. And you are giving charity. This man used to give a lot of charity. And it's private because, like, I had to really research and dig his story. It was, one of the rewards that God gives you is when the higher truth comes, it penetrates your heart. And so he was given the honor from being, somebody who's rejected in the outskirts of the city to be killed in defense of the prophets. And I also saw, like, there was a young kind of African man, and he was reading Surah Maryam, beautiful chapter, and he was really, really enjoying it. And it was kind of like even brought, you could see how he was like, how it hit his heart and his soul as he was cleaning the masjid, and he was just very content, such that, when it came to the, a certain passage, he just stopped and prostrated. Reminded me kind of the verse where it says, when the verses of, this is one of the defining definitions of the prophets, that they fall down in prostration and, cry a tears of adoration. And so the video kind of showed that man in that situation. Again, so he's not saying God humiliated me, although he's not saying anything, but one can see that he's, went down in prostration, adoration, adoring tears, and love for God and the prophets, because the chapter talks about, some of the beautiful prophets. And he was just emotionally moved by it, such that he was, he went down in prostration, adoring tears. So like I said, some Muslims are confused about the definitions, and they use a distorted understanding to argue. So to avoid arguing back and forth, I have in the past, since November 12th, not that far off, I have shared, like I said, the story of Solomon, and sometimes they'll come back at you with like, well, one of God's names is the one who honors and the one who humiliates. And they still do not understand what honor and humiliates mean in the eyes of God. They're they're using those names in a distorted way. They're using, you know, what honor means and what humiliation means according to the lens of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and their crew. So I'm gonna put a link of this in the video on the very end. I would encourage you to listen to it. But he seems to get it, what it means to be, for God to honor you and what it means for God to humiliate you. And the questions I leave you with is, what do honor, humiliation mean concerning faith? Is Prophet Abraham, upon him peace, who was a nation by himself, honored or humiliated by God? Is Satan, who was granted his prayer in this world, honored or humiliated by God? He was let go, God could have called him right then and there swiftly to account. But he escaped, you might say, swift punishment. Is he honored or humiliated by God? Sometimes, because we wonder, like, why some people get away. Doesn't mean God honored them or God is with them. It just means that they're going to be facing a punishment that they're not going to be able to repent for and escape. So I hope this is beneficial and that you will take some time and listen to the divine names of God, Al-Mu'izz and Al-Mudid. So thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.